We dive into your mailbag questions next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we've returned here with another episode of Locked On Ravens. I am your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, here today with another midweek edition episode here on Wednesday. Getting closer and closer to Halloween, and this Ravens team is 5-2. Now in week 8, they're in their bye. They're not playing in week 8. So a lot of time to reflect, a lot of time to really figure out what the real strengths and real weaknesses are of this team and how they can combat their weaknesses and how they can play to their strengths as the year goes on and they kind of transition into the second half of the season. So here today, we're going to be answering mailbag questions, all 3 segments. Once again, I want to thank everybody who has been asking mailbag questions over these last few weeks. It's great to have a full mailbag up and be able to talk through everybody's thoughts and answer some questions here. And I know that we got a lot for today. So if your question isn't answered here today, and if I don't have enough time to get to all of them and in the time that we're doing the show, I will answer them on tomorrow's show. We'll kind of round out the mailbag there. So again, it's great that we have so many mailbag questions, but I might not be able to get to all of them today. So if not, I'll answer that question on tomorrow's show. So we'll get them all in today, but maybe we'll have to move some over to tomorrow. So 3 segments. 3 mailbag segments. Let's dive into it all here. Before we do that, though, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, like the video for the YouTube algorithm if you do enjoy our content. We're aiming for 1,000 subscribers for our first goal of subscribers. So if you want to subscribe to the channel, I would greatly appreciate it. Also, if you're following along with us here in audio form, so Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, be sure to follow us and turn notifications on. We put out our content here Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. Eastern time. And also, be sure to follow me on Twitter. My personal account is at ChaosStriker34, and the Locked On Ravens account is at Locked On Ravens. So, with all that being said, we're going to dive right into it here and actually start off with a non-Ravens related question, and it comes from James Woods, who asks, what's your favorite Halloween candy? In the spirit of Halloween, can we find someone to perform an exorcism of the bank and castle to get our old Ravens back? And so I don't know who's going to come in and perform that exorcism. 5-2 is a pretty good record, but I know the Bengals loss put some things in perspective. The Halloween candy question, though, this is a good one. I'm gonna have to go with. I'll be controversial. I'll go with Kit Kats. I think Kit Kats, I actually didn't really like them until a few years ago. I was kind of like, I don't really like these, but something changed and I actually like Kit Kats a lot now. So I'm going to go with Kit Kats. My favorite actual candy is Sour Patch watermelons, but I don't really view that as a Halloween candy. I feel like Kit Kat is like one of the best Halloween candies out there. It's personally my favorite. And look, if you want to ask me just random questions for the mailbag, I'll answer them. It's fun to kind of talk things up both with Ravens and just with life as well. So if you have any just really random and non-Ravens related questions to ask me, I'm all game for it. So we're starting off with Halloween candy questions here. Kit Kats are my favorite. And, if you're on YouTube, you want to comment down below what your favorite is. If I'm being a bit too controversial with the Kit Kats, feel free to do so. But with these Ravens questions now, let's dive into them. And we'll start off here with a question from Josh Elliott, who asks, could the Ravens bring back DJ Fluker at right tackle and move Tyree Phillips left guard and then play power ball till Mekari comes back? Could that be an option? And so starting off with Fluker actually signed with the Las Vegas Raiders. I believe he's on their practice squad right now. So, theoretically, they could bring him up and say, hey, we're signing him off of your practice squad if they don't protect him. But so the first step to all that would be get him off the practice squad. And if the Raiders protect him, then, there's not a lot the Ravens can do about that. But I understand where Josh is coming from. Now, for me personally, I don't view this as an option that I would go with. I think that the Ravens will just go with what they have right now in Phillips and they have David Sharp and Andre Smith and a couple other guys who they can plug and play in there. They also worked out Cedric Ogbuehi from the Seattle Seahawks, well, formerly of the Seattle Seahawks. He was a first-round pick of the Cincinnati Bengals way back when. So that could be an option, a guy who has played right tackle in the NFL. And look, he's not a all-pro player, but he is probably a little bit better than what the Ravens have right now. And honestly, that's saying something. Fluker bringing him back, the familiarity aspect is very important in that. I think that if the Ravens, were to make a move and it was to bring back a guy who knew their offense and had experience playing in their offense and in somewhat of a starting role, it was the turnstile between DJ Fluker and Tyree Phillips at right guard. Well, not a turnstile. I guess it was just a rotation. But the guys were turnstiles at points. They did not play exceptionally well there. The loss of Pat McCarry is just it's huge. It's massive, especially considering Ronnie Stanley is out. Alejandro Villanueva has been an up and down player this season. So this line, it all starts up front for me. And I get bringing in a guy like Fluker who knows the offense, but for me, I just don't think he played well enough last year to warrant him coming back and having a huge role and having to learn some of the new nuances of this offense. So I understand the thought, and I think it's definitely a good thought and a good way to say, hey, let's bring back a guy who understands this offense a little bit. But I think if they were to do that, they're just going to put Phillips at right tackle and see what they have in him. And it wasn't a promising start for Phillips against Cincinnati, but maybe, he can get a bit better. I'm hoping, because Lamar Jackson needs his protection. He's looked a lot more confident in the pocket, and that starts with the guys up front, protecting and making sure Lamar Jackson has ample time to show off his skills and throw the football, as well as tuck and run as well when he needs to and wants to. Our next question here, it comes from Boiler Trainer, and he asks, do we target any position before the deadline? If so, what running back and offensive lineman is it? And so, yeah, the trade deadline's a really difficult situation for the Ravens, I think. I think they should make a move, and I think offensive line, as we talked about with Spencer Schultz on yesterday's show, is really important and should be the top priority, especially at tackle. The interior isn't as concerning. They have depth there. They can put Phillips inside at guard, where he looked great against the Raiders in week 1. They have Cleveland, who could come back soon off of IR. We're not exactly sure when, though. There hasn't been a real announcement on that. Bozeman, Powers, Cologne, they have the guys on both the practice squad and on the roster to, I think, at least hold it down there if somebody gets injured. And Kevin Zeitler, obviously, as well as there. But the tackle situation right now is just so dire. If there was a tackle I'd acquire, I agree with Spencer. He said it on yesterday's show. I'm going with Morgan Moses, the New York Jets tackle. So, depending on what the Ravens would be willing to give up for a player like Morgan Moses, is it a third? Is it a fourth? Are there any pick protections in there? Any incentives? So there's a lot that goes into it. Also, salary goes into it. For running backs, I know Marlon Mack's a name that's been brought up. James Robinson as well, if they want to take that home run swing, but it does take two to tango, especially at the NFL trade deadline, with the Ravens not having a ton of cap space to work with because they have over $50 million combined in players who are both either on injured reserve or dead money. So that's big for them. Plus, they're paying all these guys big money contracts. So I don't know if a trade deadline move will be in the works. Honestly, I think they probably will make at least one, even if it is a minor trade. But I do know that running back and offensive line are the two big positions people are looking at right now. I also know defensive back, you can look at the linebacker situation as well, but those two are kind of on the back burner for me. And maybe I would rank it offensive line, and then like a tie between running back and secondary, and then linebacker for the Ravens. I think that they're set everywhere else for the most part, and they just kind of they can't fill every single hole in their roster right now. No team can do that. So they're going to have to work with what they have and see what they have over these next couple of weeks, definitely. And our final question here before we head into our first break, it comes from Jay Brock, and we're going to continue with the trade deadline talk a little bit. And he asks, if the Ravens were to make a trade before the deadline, what move do you see in your opinion? Is the run game lacking due to lineman execution, or see the running backs not being good enough? And if the Ravens decide they want a better running back, realistically, who do they go for? So this kind of goes hand in hand with our last question. And I wanted to set it up that way because J. Brock makes a good point and asks a good question in this. And he asks, is the running game lacking due to lineman execution or the running backs not being good enough? We, again, talked about this with Spencer yesterday on our Tuesday show, and I think it is both. And the running backs, especially in an offense like this, and especially with how the Ravens were dealt that injury hand with J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, where I've said it before, this didn't happen right before the preseason and they could sign guys and put guys in their offense and see how it worked out. This happened 10 days before the regular season, so they were signing guys off the street and saying, hey, we have a game in 10 days, or we have a game in a week. So they're learning this offense, but Latavius Murray is not Latavius Murray from 2016. Le'Veon Bell is not Le'Veon Bell from 2016. Same thing with Devonta Freeman. Tyson Williams has not lived up to the bill this year. Has looked very scared running the ball. Has had a couple fumbling issues as well. So they have a lot to work on. The running backs do, but also the run blocking this year has been pretty subpar. They haven't done a great job run blocking for the most part this year. And they've faced some tough run defenses, I will say. It's not all on the offensive line, but guys just aren't winning at the line. And whenever, let's go back to the Buffalo game in the 2020 playoffs. Lamar Jackson, guys were getting open. Guys were getting open on that Buffalo secondary a little bit, but Lamar Jackson had a guy in his face every 2.5 seconds, or even less than that, 1.5, 1 second. And he just couldn't throw. And it's the same thing with the running game in that game as well. The running backs just could not run. And whenever you have a defensive player in the offensive backfield at the start of a play, or when a handoff is being executed, it's not going to work out regardless of how good your running back is. Or if a guy's in the offensive backfield on a pass play, it doesn't matter how good your quarterback is or how good your receivers are, most likely not a big play is going to happen because of that. So I think it's huge on the offensive line right now, but it isn't just on the offensive line. I think the running backs have been a bit underwhelming as well. And look, it's what we were expecting, I think, was these guys to maybe, because of the Ravens offense and how successful it had been and how running back is a very undervalued position. I think a lot of people expected these guys to come in and say, oh, there's not going to be a huge drop off between Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. But I know for me personally, this has really opened my eyes a little bit to really how valuable running backs can be at the NFL level. You don't have to pay them $100 million over 4 years or something, but I think people are missing J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards a little more than they thought they would. And they're missing them a lot. They already knew they were going to miss them a lot, but I think it is a combination. And then to round out the question here that I was asked, if the Ravens were to make a move, what do I see? Again, I think it's offensive line. If they do, maybe their move is Cedric Abwehi and they sign him. They worked him out yesterday, so maybe they sign him and that's their deadline move because they don't have the cap to really maneuver a ton this year. But we'll see. Running back, again, Marlon Mack, James Robinson. The Ravens have some holes to fill, and we'll see if they fill them over these next couple of days before the trade deadline passes. We're going to head into our first break, though. When we return, we're going to be diving into more mailbag questions, so stay tuned for that. And we will be back soon. But hey, Ravens fans, this is Kevin Oestreicher with an incredible app everyone who buys gas needs to know about, in Get Upside. Just download the free Get Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now and use promo code TOUCHDOWN and get a bonus 25 cents per gallon on your first fill-up. That's up to 50 cents a gallon cash back. Don't pay full price at the pump anymore. Get cash back using Get Upside. Just download the app for free and use promo code TOUCHDOWN to get 50 cents a gallon cash back on your first tank. Some people who drive a lot are making as much as $200 to $300 a month in cash back, and there's no catch. The cash back gets added right to your account. You can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or any gift card for Amazon and other brands. Just download the free Get Upside app and use promo code TOUCHDOWN. That's promo code TOUCHDOWN to get up to 50 cents a gallon cash back on your first tank. We return here, our second segment of this Locked On Ravens Wednesday edition. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still hanging out with you here and now. As we dive into more mailbag questions, the hot topic is obviously trade deadline. And I know that's because there are a lot of moves that the Ravens could theoretically make. But, in reality, do they have the cap situation? Do they have the cap space to make moves? Right now, it's not looking like they have a ton. So a question here from Ravens5-2 asks, what needs to be addressed most? Offensive tackle, cornerback, inside linebacker, or running back? Will the Ravens make a move before the deadline in one or more of these areas? The draft capital is there. Personally, for me, it's offensive tackle. And so, yes, as I said in the first segment, I agree it is offensive tackle. But Ravens5-2 asks another question inside of this question that I want to answer, because I know the questions are a bit repetitive in terms of who are the Ravens going to get, what position. So, and look, it's a hot question. I don't blame anybody for asking it, but I want to kind of cater the questions to have different answers each time instead of saying Marlon Mack and James Robinson every single question. So I think that one, yes, personally for me, it is offensive tackle as well. I think Morgan Moses would be the guy for me if I'm looking at a guy to acquire. But again, maybe it is Cedric Abwehi and that's their move. But Ravens5-2 says the draft capital is there. And the draft capital is absolutely there for the Ravens. And they have a ton of picks in the top 100, the top 130. They have a ton of third rounders and they have a bunch of fourth rounders. So what you could say about this is the Ravens could package those fourth rounders and they could move up to maybe a higher second round pick or move up in the first round and take somebody there. because I think that that's part of it, where it's not only can you trade the draft capital in the draft, but you can trade the draft capital for players at the trade deadline. So for Yannick Ngakoue, the Ravens give up a third and a fifth. For Marcus Peters, it was Kenny Young in the fifth. So there are multiple ways to use that draft capital and use those assets in positive ways for your team that isn't necessarily drafting a player. Now, the issue for the Ravens this year, and it's different compared to what the 2020 offseason was and the 2019 offseason was, and even those deadlines as well, is that the Ravens are going to have a lot of holes on this roster during the offseason. They have a ton of pending free agents that include guys like Anthony Averett, Bradley Bozeman, Deshaun Elliott, Patrick Makaria, and a bunch of others. And they're going to have to make a ton of choices because these are very talented players, and we're now reaching the point in this Ravens era where they're going to have to let some guys go. We saw it with Za'Darius Smith. We saw it with Matthew Judon, and even Ngakoue, if you want to throw his name into there. They don't have the luxury of money. This isn't the MLB where they can sign anybody they want for whatever contract they want to sign them for and stuff like that. They have to work under the salary cap and make sure the law works out. So with Lamar Jackson having his big money contract coming up, that's going to cost them a big chunk of change, with them maybe wanting to go with re-signing Averett or Bozeman or Elliott or a combination of those guys, plus having other guys who are hitting free agency. The Ravens, they're going to need to replace some of that veteran production with rookies. So I don't know if they're going to be too willing to say, hey, we're going to give you all these draft picks for a player that we might have for a year or two, and he's going to cost us another part of our salary cap. So the draft capital is absolutely there. I 100% agree. But I think this trade deadline is a little bit different because of what lies ahead. And I'm not saying that, the Ravens are losing every talented player they have. They're going to be terrible after this year. That's not what I'm saying at all. But they've been a really good team in the draft at finding players, finding rookies, and even kind of preparing the rookies in their second years and for their third years. They are good at finding players who can work on their rookie contracts and really provide veteran impact. And that's what they're probably going to have to do this year because they have a ton of draft capital. I could see them trading maybe one pick or two picks for a player this year who could maybe have an impact next year as well, or maybe a rental. But at the end of the day, I think the Ravens aren't going to be too willing to part with a ton of draft capital for a ton of players just this year, in my opinion. Our next question here, it comes from Alex DeLong, and he asks, even with the issues on the offensive line, would you trade for a stout defensive lineman to help propel the defense? And I'll say this, Alex, I think the Ravens have their stout defensive lineman on the way, and it is Derek Wolfe. Wolfe, I don't think he's been a forgotten man, but he has definitely been missed on this Ravens defense. He's a player who just does so much for this Ravens team and was one of the unsung heroes and honestly one of the most underrated players in the NFL in 2020. Finished with 51 total tackles last year, had a sack in there as well, but was one of the best run defenders in the NFL. And I think that his presence, it's going to take away from the snaps of Calais Campbell, which Calais Campbell's playing great football overall, but I think he is going to need to have some rest as we get to the second half of the year because he has played the highest snap rate on the defensive line this year so far. So having Derek Wolfe coming back, giving them that extra option and extra run stuff for Brandon Williams has looked so not amazing in games this year so far. So I think having Wolfe back on the field 100% healthy is really going to help them. So if Wolfe wasn't coming back and he was out for the year, maybe I could see the Ravens making a move and trading a late pick for a defensive tackle that is just not in a rotation on the team anymore. But I think with Wolfe coming back, they're not going to necessarily need to trade capital for a position where they're getting a guy back at. So that pretty much to me counts as an addition, which I think is great because, you get a really quality player, but I don't think you have to give up the capital. Well, you don't if it's Wolfe, which I think is the best case scenario. Our next question here, it ends up coming from Josh, and this kind of goes a bit hand in hand with the last question we got asked, and he asks, which team members on IR with non-season-ending injuries are most likely to return after the bye? And this is another good question because the Ravens have been, so decimated with injuries over this whole 2021 season that I think that guys are kind of getting caught up and saying, oh, this guy's on IR, this guy's on IR. So people who will come back after the bye, I think it's going to be Derek Wolfe. He'll probably be back soon. It seems like he returned to practice yesterday, was designated to return from injured reserve. We got good news as well when Nick Boyle was designated to return and he returned to the practice field as well. So those two guys are definite Other than that, we'll probably see Chris Westry come back at some point. His torn meniscus ended up being an injury that probably won't be season ending, but I do think that he's probably going to miss a couple more weeks here, and then he'll end up coming back. Other than that, though, they'll get Ben Cleveland back at some point as well. It doesn't seem like he'll be out for the whole year. John Harbaugh didn't say that, and it seems like it's more of a short-term thing, more like what we saw with Tyree Phillips. I think that's what we'll see there. But, other than that, Latavius Murray wasn't put on injured reserve. Sammy Watkins also wasn't put on injured reserve, but those two will most likely be back probably pretty soon after the bye week. Hopefully, not confirmed, but hopefully. So it's all these reinforcements that are really exciting that the Ravens are going to get back here. And this will make them a better football team by not trading, not having to give up all that draft capital. They're getting guys back, and they've been so decimated. You can talk about the season enders. You can talk about the month-long ones, the couple week ones, the just week ones. The Ravens have had countless amount of players miss practices, miss games, and miss the season here. So getting those guys back like a Boyle, like a Wolfe, Watkins, Westry, whoever, those guys will be so important to this team down the stretch. For this team is so stretched thin. They are so stretched right now for depth. They're playing guys at all these different positions. They're trying to make the positional versatility work. And it's worked to an extent, but I think you obviously want to have your team 100% healthy, and the talent that the Ravens have will get them there. Well, not 100%, not really anything close to it, to be honest, but they'll get them closer to 100% and get some of that talent back on the football field. We'll head into our final break, though. When we return, we'll dive into our final batch of mailbag questions and run through them there. So stay tuned for that, and we will be back soon. But we're back and better than ever. A new web interface for the start of the basketball season and more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the basketball and football action this season. Head to our new updated desktop or mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code LOCKEDON to receive your bonus. From basketball, football, baseball, postseason, NHL, boxing, UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts. And Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar ever. If you haven't tried a Built Bar by now, you're missing out. They say it's a protein bar, but it does not taste like one. You have to try one of these amazing bars yourself to believe it. Most protein bars, they can be chalky or waxy or just plain hard to choke down. A Built Bar, though, is soft. It's covered in 100% real chocolate, and when you bite into it, you know you're eating something different. It's more of an experience, one that you'll enjoy. So go to Built.com and use promo code LOCKED15, and you'll get 15% off of your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. We've returned here our final segment of this Wednesday edition of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostreicher, your host, still hanging out with you here. And we return diving into the final batch of our mailbag questions. And I know it's been very trade deadline oriented, but it's a very important topic so far. We'll start with two questions here from Eric Clark, who asks, one, at this point, Duvernay is our best ball carrier, not named Lamar Jackson. Why don't we get him 5 touches a game? I don't care if it's 5 jet sweeps. And Eric, yeah, the run game, as we talked about in that first segment, has not been especially pretty over the course of this entire season. They've had their flashes, but it's just not what it was. And so Devin Duvernay is somebody who can be a weapon on those jet sweeps. And we actually had a question similar to this last week about Cordero Patterson and saying, why don't the Ravens use Devin Duvernay in a Cordero Patterson role? And I think the Ravens want to get Devin Duvernay more involved. I would not be opposed to him getting 3 jet sweeps a game. Even if you want to give him the 5, as you mentioned there, Eric, I wouldn't be completely opposed to it. Just switch up the game plan a little bit, switch up the tempo. I think that'd be huge. But I do think that the Ravens view him as that wide receiver. And that's not saying that because he's a wide receiver, he can't be used in multiple different ways. The Ravens should use him in multiple different ways. But I do think that they're going to continue to pound the rock with Murray and with Bell and with Freeman. And they've really gone away from it in recent weeks. The Chargers game was a bit different because the Chargers run defense is just not good. But I think that Duvernay should be used a bit more. I agree with Eric here, and I think getting him involved with a couple more jet sweeps would help this offense, especially if guys can seal off the edge and make sure Duvernay has some room to operate. We've seen how dangerous he can be on those options. The next question from Eric Clark, best option to fix the run game, get younger, faster backs on the practice squad, or change the run concepts to maximize vet strengths? At this point, I think it's the second one. You got to change up the concepts a little bit. the offensive line, the run blocking has not been great, as I mentioned. And I think, this is a power offense. They run a ton of stuff that maximizes the strengths of their backs. And the backs for the Ravens all are very versatile and different from each other, but they can work off of one another. You want to go back to 2020, we can do that. We can talk about how Gus Edwards, more of that north-south runner, is that downhill type player, but is added to his arsenal. J.K. Dobbins, more of the home run hitter, great balance, that type of thing. So in the roles that these Ravens running backs have, you have Latavius Murray kind of playing Gus Edwards. You have Devonta Freeman kind of playing Justice Hill. You have Tyson Williams and Le'Veon Bell sprinkled in there as well. So it's just a matter of finding ways to fit them in. I don't necessarily know if the extra 0.2 in a 40-yard dash is going to help anybody at this point, because the Ravens, these veterans are not what they once were, but they just need holes to run through at this point. I think that's where you start. And then if you want to bring up a guy like Nate McCray from the practice squad, I think that's fine if it's still not working out. But I think, it starts with the offensive line. I think everything on an offense does start up front. And then from there, you can work back and say, all right, the offensive line is better, but the run game hasn't improved because the vision isn't there, the cutback ability isn't there, or whatever. And then you can say, all right, Nate McCrary, let's go. It's your time. So it's a little of both, honestly, but I'll say change the run concepts first and figure out how to maximize those vet strengths. And then after that, you can say, all right, it's just not working. We're going to go with something else. Our next question here, it ends up coming from Dean Carter, and he asks, what are your thoughts on what's going on with Tylan Wallace? And Tylan Wallace is a very intriguing player, very interesting player overall, someone who I think has a ton of upside, a ton of potential, but this is about what I was expecting, honestly, from a guy like Tylan Wallace, especially as guys begin to work themselves back to full health, like Rashad Bateman, like Sammy Watkins, and those players. Wallace is someone who I never thought was going to get a ton of playing time as a rookie. And if you were with me here during the whole draft process or pre-draft process leading up to the 2021 draft, you know how not opposed to, but I was very on the train of the Ravens are not drafting 2 wide receivers. Now, best player available, Tylan Wallace was the right pick. Positional need wise, it was not the right pick. I still like the pick though. Don't get me wrong. But the reason that I was saying the Ravens aren't going to draft 2 wide receivers is because they needed depth elsewhere. I wanted them to draft Rashad Bateman. They did that. And after that, what I was saying through that whole process was they have Bateman, they have Watkins, they have Brown, they have Duvernay, they have Prochet, and they have Boykin. If they add another wide receiver, then one's going to get cut. And look what happens. They keep 7. They put 2 on IR, but regardless, they keep 7. They have 7 on their roster right now. So all it's proven wrong there. But what we're seeing is the Ravens are stretched thin for depth at other places. I think a tackle would have been nice there. But with Wallace, he's not going to get snaps over Marquise Brown. He's not getting snaps over Bateman, over Watkins, over Duvernay, over Prochet. You can make an argument for Boykin, but Boykin's the best run blocking receiver. So Wallace is 7th on the depth chart. That doesn't mean he's not a good player. It doesn't mean he's not going to make an impact in future years. But honestly, I was expecting him to be inactive, but he's performed really well as a special teamer, and that's where his value is for them right now. And he's making an impact on the field that maybe isn't what a lot of people expected he would be doing, especially on special teams, but he's doing it and he's doing it well. So I've been impressed with Wallace on special teams, and he's learning to play wide receiver at the NFL level in practice. And he doesn't have the reps yet there in actual game situations, but I do think overall he has played a lot better on special teams than I initially anticipated. And he's impressed me in that area for sure. Our last question here comes from Lucy Bean. And the question is, the Ravens have one of the worst pass defenses in the league. Other than the Denver and Charger games, they have been lit up. Why would anyone try to run? Is there a fix? And so, yeah, I do understand that whole thing and how everything works out with that. But, Lucy, it's kind of like what we talk about with the Ravens. And honestly, with the Ravens and what their run offenses were in 2019 and 2020, you could make an argument that they should have never passed the ball even once based off how well they're running the football, but it's all about balance. And I know, game scripts can be different. Teams will be down, teams will be up, teams will want to climb back in the game. The Ravens' pass defense has not been good this year, I agree. But I do think that this team ends up not really playing up to their potential in that way. So I think what we saw against the Chargers, for example, is exactly how this team needs to perform. And for the Bengals, right, they lit up this Ravens team. So why would anybody try to run? It's mostly because of balance. You can't pass the ball 65 times and run it once and expect defenses not to adjust in-game to that. So you have to switch it up. But what teams are doing is they're throwing it a lot more on this Ravens team than they're running it, and that's where the success has been. The Ravens' run defense has been pretty stout this year overall. So the teams are throwing it more, and that's where some of those numbers come from, other than, the poor play that the team has had. Words. So I do think that the Ravens pass defense will get better. It has been one of the worst in the league so far. I'm not going to sugarcoat that, but at the end of the day, I think they will improve, and teams might be forced to try to run the ball a little bit more to try to get their game script going. And I lied about that last question. How could I forget about my man Charles Davis here? I can't believe I scrolled past the questions. I'm doing them out of order, and I kind of scrolled past Charles's question. So Charles, he asked, what is the number one thing the Ravens need to do to pull themselves together during this crucial bye week? Love the content. Keep up the good work. Well, thank you, Charles. I appreciate that. And this was a really nice question to have last, actually. I'm glad that we're talking about this one last, because it's a good way to round out the show. The one thing that the Ravens need to do to pull themselves together during the crucial bye week is obviously come together as a team, but it's tackling. It has to be tackling on the defensive side of the ball. Tackling is one of the first things you learn. It's what goes with football. You get the guy on the ground and whatever. This is not touch football. You can't touch him with two hands, and that's what happens. The Ravens, they have a bunch of guys who are good tacklers, in my opinion, but they're not playing like it this year. Marlon Humphrey has been a good tackler. Deshaun Elliott can be a good tackler. Chuck Clark, same thing. They're also working with guys who are learning to tackle better, like Patrick Queen, for example. But we're now seeing it from the defensive linemen, Brandon Williams and a couple of other guys who aren't playing up to their potential. The Ravens, John Harbaugh said it, they're going to be a mediocre defense until they end up tackling well. And that's just the reality of the situation. It's not him being like mean or anything. It's not me saying this team is terrible, but it's reality. If this team can't bring down players and ball carriers on the first attempt, or at least work a guy into another tackle, it's going to be a huge issue. Like we saw against Cincinnati, where Jamar Chase has a 6-yard reception. The Ravens can't tackle him. He goes for 76 and a touchdown. TJ Uzomah gets open deep twice. The Ravens can't bring him down twice, and he gets into the end zone twice. I do think that that is the number one area this Ravens team has to improve upon, because without that, you're hurting your defense by giving up big plays. You're hurting your offense by putting them in a hole, and it goes hand in hand with each other. So at the end of the day, tackling is my number one issue. Tackling is my number one concern. And that's personally the number one thing that I'm attacking during this bye week if I'm the Ravens. So that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you again for all the mailbag questions. I believe we got through all of them. We ended up squeezing them all in there. So thank you for all those mailbag questions once again. Let me get back here tomorrow. We'll be diving into more Ravens football talk, so stay tuned for that, and I will see you tomorrow.